Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Joanna Moncrieff. She is one of the leading critics of psychiatry at the moment. She's actually interesting and unique in that she is a professor, so you could kind of think of her as being a critic from within the big tent of psychiatry. I mean, she's still pretty mainstream, but essentially all of the stuff that she writes is really in a very nice way saying that we've really messed up with psychiatry and we're not doing things right. The main idea that Joanna Moncrieff has really put out there, which I think is the most important part of her work, is the idea of the chemical cure being a myth.
Is there any drug that cures depression?
No.
You may have heard about her from recently, actually. They released this big umbrella meta-analysis where they looked at all of the different ways people had been kind of saying that mental illness was due to chemical imbalances, and she analyzed all of that and essentially showed that there was no evidence that, low serotonin was causing problems with depression, and essentially it was all a big lie. And this kind of annoyed a lot of people. But yeah, she's been saying this stuff for years, and here's the main thesis. So she was noticing, and I noticed this as well, that a lot of physicians were actually talking to patients about their mental illness being biological in nature, that there was some underlying chemical imbalance that the drugs were fixing. And she really showed that this was just essentially, it's a marketing scam. It's one way of talking about mental illness that essentially keeps people taking medications and keeping them happy. And so instead of just critiquing it there, she introduces a whole new model of how we should be thinking about psychiatric drugs. And it's so intuitive and it makes sense, and it's called the drug-centered model. And what the drug-centered model is really about, it's about recognizing that each of these chemicals that has a signature effect, a reproducible effect on your psychology and on your mood. For instance, let's not think about SSRIs as rebalancing your serotonin. Let's think about SSRIs as a drug which causes a degree of emotional constriction. They can be blunting, they can take the edge off emotions. But when you actually look at it in that way, it's actually a much better way to practice psychiatry. Let me explain. So, if you give someone a drug like an antidepressant for depression, and if you think it's just rebalancing your serotonin, you might not monitor other things. But if you're giving these drugs out from the framework that, okay, this has a drug effect of emotional constriction, you actually start to monitor it a lot better in your patients. And this is really what I got out of her work. It's like, you're not just going to be focused on their anxiety and their depression and how this drug effect has taken the edge off that. You're actually going to start looking in other areas. For instance, because it's a drug effect, it's also going to take the edge off happy emotions, things like motivation. Once you start seeing it in that way, you can actually talk to your patients and really try and get a sense of all the different ways the drug is affecting them. One of the most important ways, which is often overlooked with these medications, is, especially for the antidepressants, is how they affect relationships. Do you think that if you kind of turn down the volume on your kind of emotional range, that could have an effect on your relationship? It certainly can. Relationships are really delicate. You need to be super aware of what's happening with your partner, and you need to respond to them in an empathetic way. If you overshoot with the drug effect with an SSRI or an antidepressant, you can really mess things up, not to mention the sexual stuff, but more of that interpersonal stuff. If you've turned the volume down to help someone cope with anxiety and depression, but now when their kid is coming up to them and it's like, hey mom, I'm having a hard problem at school. If you're having a degree of blunting, you may be less concerned about that, and you may be less aware of these kind of warnings coming in and these anxieties that you need to attend to. And so when you see the effects of these drugs more as a direct drug effect that can have multiple effects on someone's mood, it actually allows you to be, one, a more informed patient, but for me, it's like a better doctor because I'm looking at all of the different things they're doing. And so in her book, Myth of the Chemical Cure, she goes over all of the different drug classes, antidepressants, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics. She explains what she thinks the primary drug effect is and how they help in these conditions. And really, I think it's totally groundbreaking. I mean, other people have been talking about this, but no one has put more effort into these ideas than Joanna Moncrieff. And the fact that she's been able to do all of these things while remaining employed, because honestly, like a lot of the other critics have been kind of chased out of universities, it's really a testament to how good she is. She's also Mark Horowitz's mentor as well. They do a lot of stuff together in London, and he is emerging as one of the biggest leaders in the deprescribing space and the critical psychiatry space. So 2 really good books from Joanna that you should read. The first one is Myth of the Chemical Cure. I already talked about that. I think everyone should read this one. It's really well written. The other one is The Bitterest Pill. Now this one's about the story of the antipsychotic drugs. If you're taking these for schizophrenia, bipolar, or severe depression, you're going to find this one really, really interesting. So I hope you enjoyed that overview of Joanna Moncrieff. She's probably the second biggest influence on me as a psychiatrist behind David Healy, and so really, really strongly recommend that you check her out.